It started in Nashville, in a private room above a steakhouse downtown, the kind of place companies rent when they want success to feel expensive. My wife, Kelly, had just been promoted. Regional director. Marketing. Everyone around the table was smiling too hard, laughing too quickly, raising glasses like they were rehearsing gratitude. I sat 3 seats down from her, close enough to hear every shift in her tone, far enough to know I wasn't really part of the celebration. Kelly stood, wine glass lifted, cheeks warm from attention. She always looked her best when strangers were watching. Sharp black dress, gold earrings, that practiced confidence that made people trust her before she'd said a word. Her boss was grinning. Her coworkers leaned in. Her best friend Madison sat near the end of the table, already tipsy, already loud. Kelly tapped her glass with a fork. "I just want to thank everyone who helped me get here," she said. "The team, leadership, everyone who believed in me." Polite applause followed. Then she smiled wider and turned toward me. "And especially my husband," she said, pausing for effect, "for supporting me in every way except one." A few people laughed automatically, not understanding yet. She took a sip, then said it clearly. "He's terrible in bed." The room went silent so fast I could hear the ice settle in someone's drink. Nobody moved. Nobody knew where to look. Her boss stared at the tablecloth. One of the younger guys coughed into his fist. Madison's expression changed first, shock, then embarrassment. Kelly laughed alone, expecting the room to catch up. I didn't say anything. I looked at her the way you look at a house after seeing smoke in the walls. Not panic, not anger, just the quiet realization that the damage had been there longer than you knew. She noticed the silence too late. "Oh, come on," she said. "Relax, it was a joke." No one helped her. I stood slowly, set my napkin beside the plate, and picked up my jacket. My hands were steady. That surprised me. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Home," I said. "Don't be dramatic." I looked at her once more. The woman I'd defended, trusted, built a life around. There are moments when a marriage ends before anyone files papers, before anyone packs boxes, before the shouting starts. For me, it was there in Nashville, under dim lights and polished silverware, while my wife searched the room for laughter that never came. Madison lowered her eyes, and I knew there was no way back after that. Before Nashville, our life looked stable from the outside. We had a brick house in the suburbs with trimmed hedges, 2 cars in the driveway, and framed vacation photos lining the hallway like proof that happiness could be documented. I worked operations for a transport company, long hours, steady pay, the kind of job that keeps schedules moving and problems quiet. Kelly worked in marketing, where titles changed often and everyone seemed to celebrate themselves for surviving meetings. We hosted neighbors twice a year, sent Christmas cards on time, and knew exactly what to say when people asked how things were going. We always answered, "Busy but good." It was close enough to believable. Most evenings followed a pattern. I came home first, loosened my tie, checked invoices at the kitchen island while something cooked in the oven. Kelly arrived later, usually talking before she had even set down her bag. Office politics. New campaigns. Someone lazy. Someone jealous. Someone threatened by her talent. I listened more than I spoke. She liked an audience more than advice. We ate dinner across from each other, plates warm, television low in the next room, 2 people performing routine so well it almost felt natural. We planned vacations the way some couples plan repairs. Something to look forward to so you do not study what is cracking underneath. Charleston in spring. Denver in winter. A week in Florida that existed mostly as photos of smiling faces and filtered sunsets. We looked like people who loved each other. Sometimes I even believed it while standing beside her. Then there were the smaller things. Late nights that multiplied without warning. Her phone turning face down whenever I entered a room. Passwords changed on devices I had never touched. Charges on cards for places she claimed not to remember. A new coldness in bed that arrived without explanation and stayed without apology. If I asked, she blamed stress. If I asked twice, she blamed me for asking. I noticed all of it. That was the truth. I just kept converting facts into excuses because excuses are easier to live with than conclusions. I told myself promotions demanded sacrifice. I told myself successful people became distracted. I told myself marriages had seasons, and this was simply a difficult one. What I never admitted was that I had begun timing her arrivals, memorizing tones in her voice, and listening for the garage door with the focus of a man waiting for weather. Even before Nashville, Some part of me already knew the storm had started. That night in Nashville, I stopped lying to myself for the first time. I drove back to the hotel alone through streets full of music and neon, and every strange moment from the last 2 years began lining up in my head with the clean logic of freight cars coupling one after another. Nothing was random anymore. Nothing needed excuses. I had spent months treating warning signs like isolated weather. Now I could see the whole season. There were the business trips she never photographed. Kelly documented everything worth showing. Yet somehow conferences in Atlanta, Dallas, and Phoenix existed without a single picture of a lobby, dinner, skyline, or airport gate. She posted coffee cups, shoes, and sunsets, but those trips produced silence. At the time, I called it being busy. In the car, I called it concealment. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. There was the switched-off phone. Not dead battery, not bad signal. Fully off. She said flights required it, meetings required it, battery issues required it. Funny how every explanation required me to be naive. I remembered nights staring at the ceiling while voicemail picked up again and again. I remembered how calmly she returned my concern as irritation. Then there was the spending. Hotel upgrades she blamed on billing errors. Spa charges she said belonged to clients. Restaurant tabs large enough for 2 people with wine, explained away as team dinners where everyone somehow forgot to reimburse her. I had accepted each story separately because accepting one lie at a time feels manageable. Seeing them together was something else entirely. Even smaller details changed shape. New lingerie never worn at home. Gym sessions that began after dark. Sudden interest in whitening strips, expensive perfume, and dresses she said were for networking. The way she guarded her purse when she used to leave it open on counters. The way she smiled at messages and then looked annoyed when I entered the room. I reached the hotel and sat in the parking garage with the engine off. I wasn't angry yet. Anger belongs to confusion. What I felt was colder and more useful. I understood that humiliation at dinner had not been an accident. People reveal what they believe they can afford to reveal. Kelly had mocked me publicly because somewhere inside, she thought I would still stay. She thought I was too invested, too patient, too predictable to leave. She was wrong. When I finally went upstairs, I did not rehearse arguments or imagine reconciliation. I lay awake in a dark room beside an empty half of the bed and watched the ceiling until dawn, while the last pieces of denial quietly died. At home, I acted exactly as I always had. I unloaded the dishwasher, checked the mail, asked about her day, and listened while Kelly described coworkers I no longer believed existed in the way she described them. I nodded at the right moments, smiled when expected, and kept my voice level. If she noticed anything different in me, she never showed it. Kelly had spent years studying reactions, not silences. Inside, something had already ended. I was no longer searching for the right sentence that could repair us. I was no longer replaying old vacations, old laughter, old versions of her like evidence for the defense. Memory can be persuasive when you want to remain trapped. I had stopped wanting that. For months, I had measured myself against her dissatisfaction. If she was distant, I worked longer and bought flowers. If she was cold, I planned weekends away. If she was critical, I corrected habits she had suddenly decided were flaws. I kept trying to become the version of a husband that would make her return. The promotion party showed me the truth. There was no version of me that could compete with the thrill of deceit. So I changed my purpose. Instead of trying to save the marriage, I began protecting the man who would survive its end. I copied financial statements. I reviewed insurance policies. I made lists of shared accounts, debts, subscriptions, passwords, deed records, retirement balances. Not dramatically, quietly, methodically, the same way I handled logistics problems at work. Facts first, emotion later. Kelly mistook calm for weakness. She came home one evening, tossed her heels by the stairs, and asked why I seemed less needy lately. I almost laughed. Need had left the house before she did. I'm busy, I said. With what? She asked. Thinking. She rolled her eyes and walked upstairs. That response bothered her more than an argument would have. People who rely on control prefer noise. Silence gives them nothing to shape. At night, I slept better than I had in months. Not well, but better. Decision has a strange effect on the body. Once you stop negotiating with reality, exhaustion loses some of its weight. I still watched her move through our rooms, still recognized the woman I married in gestures and angles, but the emotional math had changed. I was no longer trying to be the perfect husband for someone living a double life. I was simply the last honest person left in the house, preparing to leave it. I simply watched. Once I stopped trying to fix anything, observation became easy. Kelly moved through the house with the confidence of someone who believed the audience was still asleep. I let her believe it. I made coffee, left for work, came home on schedule, and gave her no reason to change her habits. People reveal more when they think the danger has passed. She had started taking calls outside. Even in winter, she stepped onto the back patio with her coat half-buttoned, speaking low and fast while pretending to admire the yard. When she came back in, she always wore the same expression people use after deleting evidence. If I asked who it was, she answered too quickly. If I did not ask, she studied my face, disappointed. I noticed how nervous she became whenever I touched her purse. One Saturday morning, I picked it up only to move it from a chair, and she crossed the kitchen in 3 sharp steps to take it from me. She laughed afterward, said she had lipstick inside that might spill. There was no lipstick smell, only panic. Then her attention shifted toward my accounts and paperwork. She asked where I kept tax files, whether my bonus structure had changed, whether my company still matched retirement contributions at the same rate. She framed each question as planning. Future goals, better organization, joint security. I answered politely and vaguely. She was gathering numbers, not building dreams. The message came by accident or by carelessness. Her phone lit on the counter while she was upstairs showering. I did not reach for it immediately. I only looked because the screen was bright in a dark kitchen. The preview showed one line. Need those statements before Friday. Delete after reading. Brett. Brett was her boss. I memorized the words before the screen dimmed. No hearts. No flirtation. Something colder than romance. Coordination. When she came downstairs, hair wet, robe tied loose, I was reading the sports page like an old man with no imagination. Everything okay? She asked. Fine, I said. She picked up the phone and checked it at once. Her eyes flicked to me, then away. From that moment on, the facts began collecting themselves. Receipts left in pockets. Mileage that did not match routes. Charges coded as clients with no matching names. Calendar invites that vanished after midnight. It no longer felt like discovery. It felt like gravity doing its work, bringing hidden things down one by one until they could not stay suspended any longer. It turned out this was larger than betrayal. Affairs can be ugly and private, the kind of damage 2 people drag into court and then into memory. What I was seeing had a different shape. Brett was not only sleeping with Kelly. He was using her, and she was helping him. Once I understood that, the marriage became the smallest part of the problem. I began with expenses. Kelly had left a folder on the dining table one night, claiming she needed to review campaign numbers before morning. She fell asleep on the couch before opening it. Inside were printouts marked client entertainment, travel development, market outreach. The labels were clean. The totals were not. Hotel suites charged to regional budgets. Airline upgrades for trips that had no meetings attached. Restaurant bills for cities where no conference had been held. Reimbursements approved by Brett himself. I photographed every page and returned them exactly as found. Then I compared dates against the calendar she kept on the refrigerator. Chicago training matched a weekend spa invoice in Scottsdale. Nashville planning session matched a 2-night stay downtown with no listed attendees. It was not sloppy. It was practiced. They had done it enough times to trust the pattern. The next surprise came from Madison. She texted me from an unknown number and asked if we could talk somewhere quiet. We met in a coffee shop near my office where nobody knew either of us. Madison looked tired, sober, and older than she had at the party. I'm done covering for her, she said. I said nothing. She told me it was just flirting at first. Then trips. Then money. Then she started asking about your accounts. Bonuses. Property value. Retirement balances. I kept my face still. Madison slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were copies of emails Kelly had forwarded to her by mistake, then asked her to delete. Budget approvals. Fake agendas. Notes about moving personal charges through promotional accounts. Why help me now? I asked. She looked down at her coffee. Because I watched her humiliate you in Nashville and realized she'd become someone I don't recognize. There are moments when people confess for themselves more than for you. I understood that, and took the envelope anyway. What had been private was now corporate, legal, financial. Kelly had not only betrayed me, she had stepped into a fire that would burn everything around her once air reached it. I did not need revenge anymore. I only needed patience. We met again at a table 2 weeks later, this time at a charity event hosted in a downtown hotel ballroom. Round tables, white linens, silent auction boards, people dressed in borrowed sincerity. Kelly moved through the room as if nothing in her life had shifted. She wore a navy dress, smiled at donors, touched elbows lightly, and spoke in the polished tone she used whenever she needed strangers to mistake confidence for character. I arrived alone and took my assigned seat without fanfare. Kelly noticed me across the room and gave the smallest nod, the kind couples use when they are pretending to be fine in public. I returned nothing. Madison was already seated 2 chairs away. She looked composed, almost clinical, a folder resting beside her purse. We exchanged only a glance. That was enough. During dinner, Kelly talked too much. She praised the nonprofit, joked with executives, asked me whether work had been busy, then answered her own question before I could speak. She was trying to generate normalcy through volume. I let the silence beside me do the opposite. When dessert plates were cleared, Madison placed her napkin down and said, calmly enough to be mistaken for casual conversation, "Kelly, I know about Brett." Kelly froze for half a second, then smiled. "You'll need to be more specific." "The affair," Madison said. "The fake work trips. The company card charges. The reimbursements you approved through him. The statements you wanted from your husband." The table went still. 2 donors nearby pretended not to hear while hearing everything. Kelly laughed too loudly. "This is ridiculous." Madison opened the folder and slid several copies onto the linen between the centerpieces. Hotel invoices, expense reports, printed emails. Nothing dramatic. Just paper. Paper has a way of sounding final. Kelly began speaking fast, then faster. She blamed misunderstandings, jealous coworkers, accounting errors, old friends who wanted attention. She said Madison was unstable. She said Brett would clear everything up. She said I should say something. I took a sip of water. That seemed to hurt her more than accusation. "Tell them this is insane," she said to me. I set the glass down carefully. "I don't think anyone needs my help understanding." Her face changed then. Not sadness, not remorse. The first clear look of fear. Around us, conversations resumed in low currents, but the room had already shifted. People no longer saw a successful couple supporting a good cause. They saw smoke, and they knew enough to look for fire. Kelly kept talking. I barely said another word. After the charity event, things began moving without me. That was the strangest part. I had spent months thinking I would need to fight, explain, prove, defend. Instead, once enough truth reached daylight, it developed its own momentum. People who had ignored warning signs suddenly became efficient. Policies mattered again. Standards returned overnight. The company placed Brett on administrative leave the next morning. By Friday, his office key no longer worked. His profile vanished from the website before lunch. Someone in accounting called to verify signatures on old reimbursements, and 2 hours later another call went to legal. I heard all of this secondhand through Madison, who now spoke in short factual updates, as if emotion had become unnecessary. Kelly tried to control the story at first. She said Brett was being targeted by rivals. She said jealous employees had fabricated receipts. She said the event had embarrassed her and people were retaliating. Then investigators requested devices, travel logs, card records, and archived emails. Facts are difficult to intimidate. She lost her position 4 days after Brett did. There was no dramatic firing scene, no box of belongings carried through a lobby. They simply disabled access, scheduled a meeting, and ended it in a conference room with neutral walls. Corporate endings are efficient that way. Years of ambition reduced to a 15-minute calendar invite. At home, our house felt less like property and more like inventory. We moved through separate rooms, speaking only when necessary. I had already retained an attorney. She had done the same, though later than she should have. Once the numbers were reviewed, selling the house became the cleanest option. Neither of us argued for sentiment. Sentiment had no equity. The sign went in the yard on a Monday. By Saturday, there were offers. Neighbors watched from windows and pretended not to. Some were kind in the vague way people become when scandal confirms they were right to suspect something. Others avoided me entirely, as if dishonesty were contagious. I preferred the avoiders. The lawyers finalized papers in less time than anyone expected. No children. Clear records. Enough documentation to discourage games. She asked for conversations we no longer needed. I answered through counsel. People reached their own conclusions without hearing mine. That saved me the trouble of telling any story at all. By the time the closing papers were signed, I had packed my tools, my clothes, and the few things that still felt honestly mine. Everything else could stay with the walls we once called home. A few months later, I was in Tulsa for work, helping open a new regional route for the company. It was early afternoon, the kind of gray day that makes every storefront look temporary. I had finished a meeting near downtown and walked into a small cafe on the corner because it was quiet and mostly empty. I wanted coffee, 10 minutes alone, and nothing memorable. Then I saw her. Kelly stood behind the counter wearing a black apron over a plain white shirt, hair tied back. No jewelry except small studs in her ears. She looked thinner than I remembered, tired in the face, careful in the eyes. The kind of tiredness sleep does not fix. For a moment, neither of us moved. She recognized me instantly. I could see it in the way her shoulders tightened before she forced them down again. People think surprise happens in the eyes. It happens in posture. I stepped into line like any other customer. When it was my turn, she tried to smile. "What can I get for you?" Her voice was softer now, stripped of presentation. "Black coffee," I said. She nodded and turned to the machine. Her hands shook once while reaching for a cup. Only once, but enough. The room smelled of espresso and baked bread. A radio played somewhere in the kitchen. Outside, traffic rolled past without interest. Ordinary life continuing around two people who had once promised permanence. She set the cup in front of me and said, "It's on me. I can pay." "I know." I placed cash on the counter anyway. There was a pause long enough for honesty to enter. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Not dramatic, not tearful, just tired truth. I looked at her for a moment and tried to locate anger. It was gone. So was vindication. Time had removed both and left something cleaner. I nodded once. No speech. No questions. No reopening of ruins. She seemed to wait for more, maybe explanation, maybe mercy, maybe punishment disguised as conversation. I had none to give. I picked up the coffee and turned toward the door. "Are you happy?" she asked behind me. I stopped but did not face her. "Yes," I said. Then I walked out into the Tulsa cold, carrying a paper cup that burned my hand for half a block before I noticed. I no longer needed apologies, details, or reasons. Some doors closed so completely that even regret cannot reopen them. Later, Madison and I started a logistics consulting business together. She understood corporate language, I understood operations, and between us there was very little room left for nonsense. We moved to another city where no one knew our history and no one cared to ask. That was a gift I had not valued enough before, being unknown. Our office was small at first. 2 desks, 1 printer, cheap coffee, long days. It felt honest. Every invoice earned. Every win measurable. We built slowly, the right way, without pretending growth was success before it arrived. Sometimes I think about that night in Nashville. The raised glass. The silence after her words. The exact second I understood humiliation can become freedom if you let it. For a long time I saw it as the worst night of my life. I was wrong. It was the night illusion ended. The night I stopped bargaining with disrespect. The night I learned that losing the wrong person can return you to yourself. I did not leave Nashville broken. I left awake. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.